Welcome in, everyone. I'm your host, Gabe Yoakum, and this is Tradecraft. On the podcast, I talk to people who are incredibly good at what they do, and together, we take a deep dive into the distilled passion that makes successful people successful. Equal parts informative, interesting, and inspiring, we hope. We want you to walk away having learned something and feeling duly entertained. To that end, my guest on the inaugural edition of the program is no stranger to podcasts, having created a podcast empire in just a few short years. His talents, however, have allowed him to build not just one, but two separate empires, and we'll be talking about his very specific set of skills today. His dulcet tones can be heard alongside the likes of Bruce Prichard, Eric Bischoff, Tony Schiavone, Kurt Angle, Arn Anderson, and Jim Ross every single week through his ad-free shows podcast network. They can also be heard in my car on long road trips, entertaining me and lulling my wife to sleep. Conrad Thompson, welcome to Tradecraft.
Hey man, thanks for having me. That's a hell of an intro. I don't know that I'll be able to live up to that, but I'll do my best.
Hey, I didn't tell him anything that wasn't true. Generally, I like to think starting at the beginning makes the most sense. So I've workshopped a lot of ideas about questions and trying to get the most out of my guests. So the first one I have for you here, it's a little bit odd, but I want you to roll with it. What was it like to be your friend when you were a kid growing up?
That's a good question. You know, I was a kid who was into He-Man and then G.I. Joe, and I liked that show Mask, which was like a jackleg transformer show. And then, of course, professional wrestling. And I liked baseball. I collected baseball cards and football cards, and then I really got into basketball cards. I played football. I played baseball briefly, but I played football most of my life and really enjoyed football. Big Alabama fan. Joe Montana was my favorite player as a kid, and then my entire family grew up Cowboys fans, probably because, well, back then you had three stations, so you had to pick, are you a Cowboys fan or a Steelers fan? And my side of the family happened to just fall on Cowboys fans. So eventually became a Cowboys fan, got pretty good grades, and I don't know, I grew up to do mortgages and wrestling podcasts, so it's probably kind of weird in hindsight being my friend, if I had to guess.
What did you like? I mean, you mentioned the wrestling stuff. As you became a teenager and whatnot, was it all wrestling for you, or what did you do on a typical Friday night? What did Conrad Thompson get up to as a 16-year-old?
Well, that's weird because I had just gotten back into wrestling. I was a fan from when I was 7 until 11. By the time I was 12, I was done with wrestling, and it just wasn't really my thing. I had sort of put it back on the shelf. But then I guess when I'm 15 years old, I had just turned 15. I'm flipping through the channels, and I see Hulk Hogan with a black beard, wearing all black, outdoors on cable, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I thought he was a good guy on WWF. This is WCW, and he's a bad guy. But because I had just gotten out, I had no frame of reference for who Razor Ramon or Diesel were, so I didn't know anything about the quote-unquote invasion because I never saw their other characters. But the idea that Hulk Hogan was a bad guy made me stop and start taking a look. And before I knew it, man, I was all the way back in. SummerSlam 96, I was paying attention, but I didn't get the show. My first pay-per-view back was Fall Brawl 96, where the fake Sting was revealed to be fake. He hadn't, in fact, attacked Lex Luger on Nitro. He was not joining the NWO. And then I got Halloween Havoc 96. To this day, it's still my favorite WCW pay-per-view. And I just had it bad, man. And around that time, of course, the internet had started to become a thing. So I just typed in WWF, WCW, and I found all these news boards. Back in the day, there were message boards and news boards where it was not quite as pretty of an internet experience as we have now. And I saw lots of rumors and lots of fans talking about how the Eliminators were the best tag team in wrestling, and ECW was better than the other promotions. And I'm like, what is this? So I checked my local listings back when that was a thing you did, and set my VCR to record ECW at like 2 a.m. on some channel I didn't even realize we got. And then the next morning when I watched the tape, I saw a referee give a guy a DDT. I saw one of the wrestlers come to the ring smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer, and hitting people with a stick, and he wasn't disqualified. But what was most interesting to me as a 15-year-old is I saw two ladies rolling around having a cat fight with their thongs hanging out. And as a 15-year-old, that had a profound impact on my life. So I became an immediate ECW fan, and I was knee deep. So yeah, by the time I was 16, I was back into wrestling. I was also into movies. So a lot of times, on the weekends, I would hook up with some of my friends, and on a Friday night or Saturday night, we would, go get some beverages and some food and chill out and watch a famous movie like Scarface or whatever together for the first time, which was cool. And then on Sunday, we were getting together to watch whatever pay-per-view there was and live out our wrestling dreams together.
So moving on from what you did in your spare time, what was your first job? Were you one of those kids that got a job right at 14 and started doing it, or did you wait for a while and just kind of enjoy your childhood?
When I was 11, I started cutting grass and doing yard work in the neighborhood. And I did that when I was 11, 12, and 13. When I turned 14, I started working as a telemarketer, believe it or not, setting appointments over the phone with strangers for salespeople. And I learned a little bit about salesmanship and soft selling and hard selling and alternative closes and just all the stuff you learn as a young salesperson. And then by the time I was 16, I had gotten pretty good at it. So I managed a phone room, as part-time, I'd get out of school and go do that. And then when I turned 17, I started selling vacuum cleaners, and, that was kind of fun. But I got a scholarship when I was a sophomore in high school. So I sort of knew what I wanted to do, which was I want to be in sales. So I was already doing that, but just imagined that I would just grow that career. And then I guess right after I turned 19, I just turned 19 and I got recruited into the mortgage business, and I've been here ever since. So, I worked for myself cutting grass, and then I worked in a phone room, and then I sold vacuum cleaners. And now for 20 years, I've sold mortgages.
Well, it's wild, right? You're telling your sort of background, and it's almost exactly parallel to what mine is, except you did your stuff 8 years before I touched sales, right? Like I didn't touch sales until I was out of college, and did the exact same thing, start in a phone room, appointment setting, and then worked my way up to, maybe not working for myself quite yet, but we'll get there one day.
Well, I'm really, I'm glad to know you. I feel like as soon as you and I met, we were like two peas in a pod. I'm the Southern version of you. We're like bizarro versions of each other in that we both like sales and we both like wrestling, and we've both outkicked our coverage.
Well, it's a wild thing because you mentioned that, and I think back to Las Vegas, and this is a bit of a diversion, but it's fun. And I came on and I tried to help as much as I could with StarCast 2 in Vegas for you. And we're there on site, and I'm wearing my StarCast polo shirt, and I'm walking down one of the hallways at Caesar's Palace, and maybe every 20 or 30 feet, somebody else would go, "Hey, Conrad, how you doing?"
Yeah. Because
I'm a fat guy with a beard.
Yeah. Big guy with a beard at a wrestling event. They just assume that's got to be him.
This is a podcast about doing things really well, and I want to cover building a business with you. I want to focus on both the mortgage business and ad-free shows. Like I said, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you personally to some degree, and I also had the chance to work for you with StarCast 2 in Vegas. We had some great conversations about sales, both of us being sales guys at our core. I'd like to start there. So let's get into it. I want to separate this into your life as a mortgage broker and your life as a podcaster. You kind of covered how you got into that business, but my assumption is you didn't start at the top. You started at the bottom. As you're walking through the ranks of the mortgage business and selling this stuff and learning the trade, can you talk about some of the failures that you had and how they've acted not necessarily as a deterrent, but as a way to grow?
Yeah, I mean, I've never viewed failure as a deterrent. I do want to make one correction. I'm not technically a mortgage broker. I'm a mortgage banker. Not that it matters, but I know sometimes people just look at the broker as like a middleman, and those guys kind of get a bad name. And by the way, I used to do that, but the function is the exact same technicality. But yeah, listen, I started as an originator. And all these years later, it's still my favorite piece of what I do. I'm still originating. I'll originate forever. But yeah, I was originally just doing it in my home market here of Huntsville, Alabama. We're licensed in more than 40 states now. We're trying to get to all 50, but no, there were definitely missteps along the way. But it's one of those deals where I've always viewed sales as a numbers game. You know, it's, like only a stupid person would go to blackjack in Las Vegas, sit down at the table and assume, well, I've got to win every hand. No, if you really understand math, you understand the law of averages, you just understand the game, you know that losses are going to come. But even if you lose more hands than you win, you can still come out ahead financially. You just hope that I'm losing the $5 bets and I'm winning the $100 bets. And that makes up the difference. So I've always viewed sales the way my dad told me. So whenever you get a no, as a salesperson, you have to really embrace no. You're going to hear it a lot. But you understand your average. So let's say your closing percentage is only 25%. Now somebody might hear that and think, well, that's not very good. But what I understood was that's 1 in 4. So if I went and had 8 pitches and didn't make a sale, I wouldn't think, oh, I'm terrible at this. I would think I'm getting my nose out of the way. The wins are coming. Mathematically, it all works out the same. Nobody says it's going to be miss, sale, miss, sale. That doesn't happen. Sometimes you go on a run and you'll sell 12 in a row, and other times you'll go on a run and you'll miss 12 in a row. But the yeses are coming. So I always viewed the negatives, the losses, as, you know, I'm getting them out of the way. And I viewed that the same way when I wasn't just originating, when I wasn't just doing sales, but when I was, you know, making decisions for a branch or a region or a whole company. Maybe we would try an ad campaign or try a promotion. Some work, some don't. So what? Not every radio schedule I ever bought to promote my business was successful. Not every ad campaign was successful. Not every guy I recruited and trained and hired and really spent a lot of time in wound up being successful. But if I do it enough, I'm going to win in the end. So it's, you know, it's a little bit of a cliche, but you can't lose if you don't give up. And I think a lot of times when people hear a no in sales, they just say, oh, sales isn't for me, it's too hard. They give up. They quit before the success is really there. And I was never scared of the work. And so I was comfortable coming in early and staying late and doing whatever it took. And in the end, if I failed, that's okay. I'm going to learn from that and it won't happen again. And that was certainly my experience, you know, even with conventions where you and I met. You know, the first one, we learned a lot. We did better on the second one. We learned a lot there. The third one, God, it was a breeze. It was like a vacation. There was nothing to it because I had learned what not to do. And, you know, I've learned that, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And the only way to know it is to do it. And so I never really had the same approach towards failure or ran from it. That whole fear of failure is what keeps people from being successful and taking chances. And I learned to not have that fear from being a salesperson. I mean, you just get people hanging up in your face over and over and over. As a 14-year-old, you get callous to it. You know, you and I both love wrestling, and you hear a guy like Tommy Dreamer say, hey, I'm going to have to take my bookings few and far between this year. And you really pick his brain on why that is. And he says, well, I wasn't able to work 3 times a weekend like I had been for years and years. And now that I wasn't taking those bumps, I wasn't running the ropes every week, everything hurts because I had become callous to it. That's a big difference. So I became callous to no, and I don't know, man, I'm not scared of failing at all.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about the numbers game, and I think back to when you're in the sales kind of grind. You start out like you talked about in a phone room doing telemarketing and setting appointments and that sort of thing. Usually that's kind of the low level. It's where it's like sales 101, right? It's the boiler room stuff.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to break into sales. I didn't think I was going to stay on that track. I was going to teach history, like to some college, you know, some community college student somewhere at some point. But I fell in love with it. And one of my favorite like little lessons comes out of this book that was written in like 1958 called The Magic of Thinking Big. Right. And are you familiar with this book?
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah. It's a very, very sales sort of, anyway, they talk about the numbers game, and they talk about